Madam Toastmaster, fellow Toastmasters and guests. Is it true that celebrities actually cause people pain, anguish, cause them to do the wrong thing, encourage them to go off the tracks, or do they encourage them to go on the tracks? You all have people, celebrities, I'm sure, that you admire. Can you think of them right now? Just think to yourself who they are and what sort of influence have they had on your lives. While you're doing that, I'll take you back. Let's go back a long time to when I was just a little boy. Some of you will know I grew up in Glasgow. Well, when I say I grew up in Glasgow, in those days, Glasgow was a much smaller place. And if you imagine the situation with Melbourne and Frankston, and imagine that situation, say, back 50 years ago, that was almost the situation that I was in. In that Clarkston, which is where I lived, and where I was born and grew up, was only 12 miles, so what's that, about 20 kilometres away from Glasgow. 12 miles. Seems no distance at all. Yet, it was as far apart in those days as Frankston would be from Melbourne. Now, why is that? I think because the culture in those days was very much one of people living in their own community. Give you an example. My mother and father worked in a store, very much like Myers. And when Dad had proposed to Mum, and they decided to move out to Glasgow, out to the sticks, as we would say, the manager of that store, Johnny Dallas, brought my father into his office and he said, "What do you mean by this?" And Dad said, "What?" He said, "What do you mean taking this girl out of her family environment, away out into the back or beyond, and she'll never see them again?" Isn't it funny? That gives you an idea of the sort of upbringing I started with. So here was I, quite far away from the family, growing up as a very timid little boy. My brother was about 12 years older than I am, so I was basically brought up as an only child because John was off doing his own thing. I wasn't good at school. That's an understatement. I started school when I was 4.5, because in those days there was a line they drew in your ages, and if you were over such and such an age, you started primary school. There was no kindergarten in those days. And I had reached the golden age of 4.5, so I started primary school. Not helping that was the fact that the teacher had her favourites. And guess what? Her favourites could do all the things that I couldn't. I was good at some things. I just didn't know what they were. Anyway, as things grew on, I got to the age of about 10. And something happened, and this might sound melodramatic, but it's true. Something happened that was to eventually change my life. I heard on the radio, "It's now or never, come hold me tight. Kiss me, my darling, be mine tonight. Tomorrow will be too late. It's now or never, my love won't wait." That song put goosebumps in the back of my neck. I don't know why, but there was something magical about it. Who is this? Who is this person? I don't know, but I have to find out. Now it so happened that my cousin, about the same age as me, had 2 older brothers. And they had Elvis records. But their Elvis records were things like, "I'm all shook up," or "He ain't nothing but a hound dog." I didn't know it was the same person. I didn't believe it was the same person. But how did he change my life? Well, started from there. Because I had someone to admire, someone to look up to. Some may say the wrong person to look up to, and I'll come back to that later. It made me start to think. It made me start to read things in the paper. I used to buy the Elvis Monthly. It was only a small magazine, and it took me about a week to read it, but I started to read it. And the things that I would do were all to help me understand Elvis. Now, I was pretty shy, although I must say, when I was 6 years old, I had my first girlfriend. I'm rather proud of that. I can still see her doing her party piece at my 6th birthday. Run, rabbit, on the piano. But anyway, apart from that, and that was a bit of an aberration, I didn't really have girlfriends. But once I started to get to know Elvis, I started to get to move like him. When I went to the dancing, I would be dancing away, and other people like Jerry Lee Lewis. But what happened was, over the following 4 or 5 years, I went forward with Elvis, but I also went back. I went back to the early Sundays. I heard that raw music that came through. And it was really that spread that made me admire Elvis more and more. So things went on. I was introduced to a girl who I was told before was an Elvis fan. So I thought, oh, this will be great. But she was a bit strange. You know, she was so enthusiastic about Elvis, and then I realised that was me. So things went on, and for a few months I didn't give it any more thought. In actual fact, on Christmas Eve in 1969, I had one of those moments, some enchanted evening, all that sort of stuff, and there was my future wife, this girl that I'd been introduced to, and that's how Elvis brought me together. So I ask you, did Elvis have a bad influence on my life? Well, some might say yes, but I don't think so. He helped bring me out of my shell. And I think that's what we really should do when we think about our stars and our celebrities, and we should go for it.